Nancy Reagan and the powerful figures around her seemed untouchable. But behind closed doors, her words alone could bend wills, erase rivals, and control destinies in ways no one dared to challenge. Nancy Reagan had always been seen as the perfect hostess, the elegant figure at every political gala, the woman whose presence could light up a room. To the public, she was refined, charming, and untouchable, a symbol of grace and sophistication. But beneath the polished surface, there was a side of her that very few people understood, a side that operated in shadows, quietly exerting influence over those around her in ways that were unsettlingly effective. It began with small gestures, the kind of subtle persuasion that most people dismissed as coincidence. A whispered suggestion here, a carefully placed compliment there, and people found themselves bending to her will without fully realizing it. At first it seemed harmless, almost enchanting, but as time went on, the effects became more pronounced and increasingly difficult to ignore. The community around her began noticing strange patterns. Close friends and acquaintances, once loyal and outspoken, slowly disappeared from social circles. Invitations to intimate gatherings stopped arriving, and conversations about her influence carried a tone of fear rather than admiration. Rumors circulated that she had a talent for making people do things they never intended to do, and those who tried to resist found themselves isolated or subtly coerced into compliance. The sense of unease grew, yet there was no proof, no visible crime to point to. It was as if Nancy's very presence could shape events and manipulate decisions without leaving a trace. Those who worked closely with her often described an uncanny ability to read people, to understand their desires, fears, and weaknesses, and to craft words in a way that made her intentions irresistible. Political allies found themselves making concessions they would have never considered on their own. Business associates changed their strategies after even brief interactions with her, convinced it was their own idea, when in reality it had been guided by her skillful influence. Even strangers felt the pull, responding to her with a mix of awe and apprehension that left them questioning their own judgment. This talent was not loud or boastful. It was subtle, nuanced, and profoundly effective. As her power grew, the atmosphere around her became tense and unpredictable. People who once sought her favor grew wary, realizing that their success or safety could depend on navigating her carefully constructed social labyrinth. Whispers of her talent began circulating beyond private circles, though few dared to speak openly. It became a topic of quiet speculation. What exactly made Nancy so compelling, so persuasive, and why did those who opposed her often vanish from public life without explanation? The notion that she was very orally talented emerged, a phrase that carried with it both fascination and fear, hinting at a capability far beyond ordinary charm or intelligence. Despite the growing unease, Nancy moved through the world with confidence and poise. She attended social events, greeted political figures, and hosted gatherings as if nothing unusual were happening. To the untrained eye, she was simply charismatic, an influential woman at the height of her social and political life. Yet, those who observed closely could sense the underlying tension, the invisible currents of power that she controlled so effortlessly. Her reputation became a mixture of admiration and intimidation, a delicate balance she maintained with remarkable precision. In the small town and among the elite, people began to understand that crossing Nancy Reagan was not just unwise, it was dangerous, and that the true nature of her talent remained a secret that only a few could even begin to comprehend. As whispers about Nancy Reagan's influence grew louder, investigators began to notice a disturbing pattern. People who had once been close to her, individuals with thriving careers and vibrant social lives, started disappearing without explanation. At first, authorities dismissed the incidents as coincidences or personal choices, but as the number of missing persons increased, it became clear that something more sinister was at play. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances were vanishing from parties, boardrooms, and political events, leaving behind empty homes and abandoned offices. Each disappearance carried an air of mystery, and the people who remained were reluctant to speak, as if afraid that merely mentioning her name could invite trouble. Detectives assigned to the case struggled to find evidence. No signs of forced entry, no calls for help, no clear motives. Nothing suggested conventional wrongdoing. Yet every lead pointed back to Nancy. Her presence seemed to intersect with each disappearance, as if she existed at the center of an invisible web controlling the fates of those around her. Witnesses described feeling strange, almost involuntary reactions when interacting with her. Some said they felt compelled to agree with her suggestions, to follow her advice, even when it went against their own judgment. Others recalled moments of disorientation, a subtle unease that clouded their decision-making, leaving them unsure whether their actions were truly their own. Private diaries and correspondence uncovered by investigators painted an even more unsettling picture. People who had once been her friends confessed in writing to changes in their behavior that could not be explained by ordinary persuasion. They felt manipulated, influenced in ways that were difficult to articulate, yet undeniable. Meetings that should have been casual or professional became exercises in subtle coercion. Her ability to shape outcomes without force or threat defied conventional understanding, leaving investigators frustrated and perplexed. Audio recordings captured her speaking, and while the words themselves appeared harmless, listeners reported feeling intense pressure, as though their very thoughts were being guided. As the investigation deepened, it became apparent that Nancy's influence was far more calculated than anyone had imagined. Patterns emerged, showing that she targeted people at critical moments in their lives, times when they were vulnerable, uncertain, or ambitious. By carefully choosing her words, her tone, and the timing of her interventions, she could steer decisions and outcomes without ever appearing to intervene. Political figures, business leaders, and social elites all fell under her sway, and even those who believed themselves strong-willed found their actions subtly altered. It was a form of power that left no visible traces, yet its effects were undeniable and far-reaching. The public remained largely unaware, continuing to admire her charm and sophistication, while a hidden world of fear and manipulation existed just beneath the surface. Experts in psychology and behavioral science began studying her methods, describing them as an extraordinary blend of charisma, insight, and tactical communication. They realized that Nancy Reagan's oral talent was not merely a gift, it was a weapon, a tool she wielded with precision to control, intimidate, and dominate without anyone ever realizing the full extent of her power. The mystery of the missing individuals continued to deepen, and the investigation revealed only one undeniable truth. Nancy's influence was pervasive, carefully orchestrated, and far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. The investigation into Nancy Reagan's unusual influence took a startling turn when a retired aide came forward, breaking years of silence. The aide described a hidden network of people who had been quietly manipulated, coerced into silence, or shifted out of positions of power without anyone realizing it. These individuals had been drawn into her orbit over decades, each one affected by her words in ways that seemed natural at first, but, upon closer examination, revealed a meticulous strategy. The aide's testimony painted a picture of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of subtle persuasion, transforming her oral skills into a force that could reshape lives and careers with frightening efficiency. Investigators began to piece together the extent of her reach. Business leaders altered contracts after brief meetings, political figures reversed policy decisions after casual conversations, and social influencers abandoned their personal agendas after attending her gatherings. It was not coercion in the conventional sense. There were no threats, no bribes, no visible pressure. Instead, Nancy had developed a method of speaking that penetrated the mind in unexpected ways. Her words carried weight beyond their literal meaning, often leaving listeners convinced they were acting on their own free will when, in fact, their choices had been subtly guided by her influence. Audio recordings obtained during the investigation only deepened the mystery. On the surface, the recordings seemed mundane, filled with polite conversation and friendly advice. Yet listeners reported feelings of unease, a compulsion to follow instructions embedded in casual phrases, a strange alignment of thought that felt both voluntary and unavoidable. Experts in psychology and linguistics analyzed the tapes, describing the phenomenon as psychological orchestration, a form of communication so refined it bordered on manipulation at a subconscious level. Each phrase, each inflection, each pause appeared carefully crafted to elicit compliance without the listener fully recognizing it. It was an unprecedented level of influence, a talent that blurred the line between persuasion and control. The investigation revealed another chilling dimension. The longer someone remained under her influence, the more their behavior shifted permanently. Careers, personal relationships, and public reputations were subtly redirected in ways that benefited her or protected her secrets. Those who attempted to resist often found themselves isolated, their previous networks quietly eroded until they had no support. Even when individuals tried to expose her, they struggled to maintain credibility, their testimonies undermined by the very influence she had exerted over their peers. Nancy's mastery of oral persuasion had created a network of silence, one that shielded her from scrutiny and allowed her to operate without interference. As the scope of her power became clearer, a sense of fear permeated the community. People realized that Nancy's talent was not merely charming or persuasive, it was strategically engineered, honed to perfection, and applied with precision. Investigators and experts began to understand that her abilities were not supernatural but represented a profound understanding of human behavior and psychology, leveraged to control outcomes invisibly. The deeper the investigation went, the more apparent it became that Nancy Reagan had built a complex system of influence that extended far beyond social gatherings or professional interactions. Her oral talent was a weapon, an invisible force capable of reshaping lives, and it was only a matter of time before the full extent of her power would be revealed to the world. The pressure surrounding Nancy Reagan's influence intensified when a young investigative journalist decided to confront the mystery head-on. Armed with determination and a keen sense of curiosity, they traced every lead, from high society parties to exclusive business meetings. At first, the trail seemed straightforward. People who had known Nancy, who had spent time in her orbit, had vanished or changed in ways that were hard to explain. But the deeper the journalist dug, the more dangerous the task became. Anonymous warnings began arriving, subtly threatening repercussions if the investigation continued. Sources who had initially agreed to talk began retracting statements or disappearing from sight, leaving behind only faint traces of their existence. It became clear that Nancy's influence extended far beyond casual manipulation. It was pervasive, protective, and strategically maintained. As the journalist pursued the investigation, patterns began to emerge. Individuals under Nancy's influence often acted in ways that defied logic, making decisions that appeared irrational to outsiders but were carefully guided by her subtle cues. Every interaction, every suggestion, every conversation seemed calculated to achieve a precise outcome. Those who resisted experienced consequences that were not immediately visible but were deeply impactful over time, isolating them socially and professionally. It was as if Nancy's oral talent was a silent force shaping the paths of everyone around her, and those who tried to break free found themselves trapped in an invisible web. One night, following a series of elusive clues, the journalist discovered a hidden room in one of Nancy's residences. The room was filled with artifacts, meticulous records, and audio recordings, all documenting the methods she had used over decades. Every note, every tape, revealed a systematic approach to influence, detailing strategies for persuasion, psychological triggers, and social leverage. The depth of her planning was astonishing. it became evident that Nancy's talent was far from accidental. Each interaction, whether with a socialite, politician, or business leader, had been carefully orchestrated to maintain control while preserving her public image of charm and grace. The discovery brought both clarity and danger. The journalist realized that uncovering the truth about Nancy meant challenging a figure who had quietly engineered an empire of influence, one that was reinforced by fear and loyalty. Attempts to report the findings were met with resistance, both overt and subtle. Editors hesitated, fearing backlash. Sources became increasingly cautious, aware that even a casual comment could trigger consequences. The journalist began to understand that Nancy's power was not limited to her immediate circle. It extended into society at large, shaping narratives and controlling outcomes without leaving overt evidence. Despite the risks, the journalist continued piecing together the puzzle, revealing a chilling truth. Nancy's oral talent was a weaponized form of communication, a method of control refined over decades to manipulate behavior invisibly. The more the investigation uncovered, the more apparent it became that her influence was deliberate, precise, and strategically applied. What had once appeared to be charm and social skill was, in fact, a calculated system of dominance. Each revelation added weight to the growing understanding that Nancy Reagan's legacy was not just one of elegance and refinement, but also one of calculated power, exercised with subtlety and precision, leaving a trail of lives quietly reshaped under her control. The final pieces of the investigation fell into place when the most astonishing revelation emerged. Nancy Reagan had meticulously documented her influence over decades, maintaining detailed ledgers of every person she had interacted with, every subtle suggestion she had made, and the resulting decisions she had guided. The sheer scale of her operation was staggering. It was not a matter of chance or natural charisma. It was a deliberate and calculated exercise in control. Each interaction, each word, each nuance of her tone had been carefully recorded, creating a map of psychological influence that extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. Investigators who finally gained access to these records realized that they were looking at a level of manipulation that was unprecedented, almost surgical in its precision. The documents revealed that Nancy had applied her talent with careful strategy. She identified moments when individuals were most vulnerable, times of uncertainty, ambition, or personal struggle, and used those opportunities to guide their decisions. What seemed to outsiders like voluntary choices were in fact the culmination of subtle psychological nudges crafted over long periods. Political figures had shifted policies, business leaders had altered deals, and socialites had abandoned personal ambitions, all under the quiet direction of her influence. Her oral talent was not just a tool for persuasion, it was a method of quiet dominance, executed with a precision that left no evidence and no visible coercion. Experts who analyzed her records were stunned by the sophistication of her techniques. She had cataloged behavioral patterns, emotional triggers, and social dynamics, refining her approach to achieve maximum compliance with minimum resistance. Each encounter was a calculated intervention designed to produce a desired outcome while maintaining the illusion of free choice. Even those who tried to resist found themselves subtly redirected, their confidence undermined, and their networks slowly eroded. It became clear that Nancy Reagan's true power lay not in intimidation or force, but in an extraordinary understanding of human psychology combined with a remarkable ability to communicate in ways that influenced thought and action on a subconscious level. The investigation also revealed the broader impact of her control. Communities, organizations, and even political institutions had been shaped, in part, by her interventions. Decisions that affected thousands of lives were quietly guided by her words, and the full extent of her influence would never be completely known. Attempts to confront her publicly had failed, not because of lack of evidence, but because her network of influence was so entrenched that witnesses were hesitant, credibility was undermined, and subtle intimidation made challenges nearly impossible. Nancy's oral talent had become a shield, an invisible fortress protecting her from scrutiny while extending her reach into every sphere she touched. In the end, Nancy Reagan remained an enigma. Her public image of elegance and sophistication endured, even as the investigation revealed the extraordinary and unsettling reality behind her charm. She had mastered a form of influence that was invisible, pervasive, and devastatingly effective, leaving a legacy of control that touched countless lives without anyone fully understanding it. The final realization was chilling. Her power did not rely on force or confrontation, but on a quiet mastery of human behavior, exercised through words, tone, and timing, with a precision that made her untouchable. Her oral talent, once thought to be merely a gift, had been honed into a tool capable of shaping destinies, and the world had only glimpsed the surface of its true impact.